It's the week of the Monaco Grand Prix, and in recent years in Formula One, that has meant Red Bull being at the top of everyone's list as the favourites for the Monaco Grand Prix. But is that going to be the case this year? We've had some pointers, particularly from the Spanish Grand Prix, that might suggest something different is going to happen this time. And I've got Jake Boxall-Legge and Ben Anderson here to discuss what we can expect in Monaco. Now, there's a slight spoiler on the screen. We're not talking about Williams overtaking Red Bull, certainly, but Mercedes might have a chance here. Now, Ben, what is it that has got us thinking Red Bull might not have everything its own way in Monaco this year?
Well, it's those Sector 3 times at Barcelona, isn't it? That tight, twisty section from basically the end of the back straight into turn 10 right round to the start-finish line. It's all fairly low speed. The final chicane, which is in the picture there, usually that's a real strong point for Red Bull, and it gives us the best indication we have, given that cars don't test at Monaco, going into that race, which might be strong on that street circuit. And it's not looking like Red Bull from the data we have from the Spanish Grand Prix, analysing the best sector times from that weekend. In Q3, you've got Mercedes leading the way. You've got Ferrari 2 tenths down on Red Bull in Sector 3, and Red Bull 4.5 tenths down on Mercedes in Sector 3 in qualifying. In the race, that gap balloons. Leclerc was almost a second off the Mercedes through Sector 3. Vettel some 6 tenths down. Verstappen was only 3 tenths down, much more consistent. So it's looking like Ferrari will slip possibly to being third best at Monaco. Red Bull ahead of them, but still down on Mercedes in the types of corners where traditionally Red Bull have been really strong and probably the strongest on the grid. So it's now looking like potentially there are no weak spots for Mercedes, which is ominous for their rivals.
Yeah, JBL, I think Max Verstappen talked about this at length after the Grand Prix in Spain, where he said there isn't any type of corner now where Red Bull has an edge over Mercedes. There are certain corners where perhaps the cars are quite equal, but in the low-speed stuff, as Ben was mentioning, right now it seems that Mercedes really is on top. And that's fascinating insight from Verstappen to actually hear that the traditional thing we know about Red Bull in the corners might not be the case at the moment.
And I think it's mainly stems from the fact that the rear end on that Red Bull isn't particularly great, or it's not particularly dialed in at the moment. And so they can't get that traction out of those corners. And that's also a little bit of why perhaps Gasly's struggling so much in the car, because maybe with the Toro Rosso it was a different feeling, and he's not got the Red Bull rear end stability of that Red Bull, and therefore he's still a little bit cautious with it. But it also goes to show how much of a turnaround Mercedes has had, because it never used to be good at that type of circuit. Like if you remember a couple of seasons ago, Ferrari was, top dog at Monaco, and Mercedes, the car was so big it was like, trying to get a boat around a living room or something like that. But this year it's completely different, and it just, even though, as you say, it's a bit of an edgy car to drive, it seems to be something that the drivers are responding well to. And in that low speed section, the final turns at Barcelona, drivers were just hooked up. So in Monaco, we can expect it to be a similar story. Red Bull will be there or thereabouts. They're always good around there, and I'm sure that they'll look at their data from previous years and think, okay, this is what we need to do, maybe with our engine maps, with regards to traction, with regards to bolting on a little bit more downforce at the rear, that kind of thing. But I think Mercedes will have the edge going into that weekend.
So Ben, Red Bull still in the mix, as JBL explains there, but it would seem not going to be the favourite. Does that mean we have to revise our opinion on perhaps how quickly we're going to see Honda win a race in this era of F1? Because Red Bull has traditionally pinpointed certain circuits on the calendar that are the ones where they would have a chance to win. And to be fair to them, last year they largely delivered on that. We were going into this year expecting the same, really. But now, could this actually be bad news for Honda, who are perhaps hoping to get a victory on the board quite early this season?
Yeah, I think it could be bad news for them. We were talking up in pre-season or even end of last season this race as the first one that Red Bull Honda would definitely have a chance of fighting for victory. I think they'll be close, but it's not going to be the foregone conclusion that maybe we were expecting based on last season's form with Red Bull using a Renault engine, and we were considering that to be roughly equivalent to having a Honda engine. So now they'll be looking at Hungary, I guess. The caveats are, obviously Red Bull have had a difficult start to the season, a little bit similar to 2017, not quite understanding the car, not quite able to unlock its full potential. So maybe they'll make a big step forward before Monaco. Different tyre compounds, different track surface, obviously updates coming all the time. So they might eat into that gap slightly, but also they run much less rake than their main rivals. Red Bull and Ferrari have been much more aggressive in that kind of setup, and for some reason it seems that approach isn't working so well with the 2019 regulations. It seems that those cars that follow that route have all become a lot more inconsistent, a lot more tricky, whereas the Mercedes has been metronomic, and I think that's also going to hurt Red Bull, because they're so far down the road with that kind of philosophy. If there's a fundamental aerodynamic problem that's been created by the change in the rules, that won't be easy for them to solve, certainly in time for Monaco, but maybe later in the season.
JBL, if we think back to last year, we're talking about the tracks where Mercedes have traditionally struggled. One of those was always Singapore, quite late in the season, and last year we actually had Mercedes and Hamilton dominant in Singapore, which the team was so proud of, and it really was unexpected. Was that perhaps the first pointer, actually, that Mercedes had started to work out how to master these low-speed corners and these tighter circuits?
Definitely. I think it just stems from a desire of, the team is fantastically efficient, but it always had that one weak spot, and it wants to be good everywhere. I think that's just the Mercedes course of relentless progression, where they see a point of weakness, they want to go and improve on it without being to the detriment of everything else. So, of course, they've improved their performance of that. I guess Singapore is probably the best bellwether of that. That they've tried to create a wider operating range, and it's worked for them. And so potentially we'll go to Monaco. They look like they've got the strongest package, even though we've said that it might delay Red Bull's victories. Like maybe they'll win Hungary or something. They've always been quite good at Mexico as well. So even if it's that far into the season, I'm sure they'll get something. But yeah, they might have to put the champagne on ice for now.